Hello everyone, good afternoon. Are you all comfortable? Because we still have a seat here on the couch, like a beautiful seat, you can stretch your legs. Yeah? So welcome at the fourth Circus Talks of this week. So far we have had 3 very interesting topics, and today we will be talking about circus and science. So the reason why we are organizing these talks is because we want to put circus and juggling in a broader perspective. And we hope that you will learn from each other and that you can exchange ideas and get inspired. And I will also introduce myself. My name is Remke. This is Mia, and together with Jopie and Martijn, we are organizing these talks. So today's theme is Circus and Science, and we have Georg Blanke with us. And he is a perception researcher, and today he will talk about how doing brain research while juggling can actually help to understand the brain. I'm pretty excited about what he's going to share with us. So the questions will be at the end. Unless there's something very unclear, you can raise your hand and he will get to you. So yeah, let's start. Give it up for Georg Blanke.
Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction, and also from me, welcome to my talk about juggling, science, and the brain. An overview. There's a lot more people than I had expected, and to be honest, I'm nervous as fuck. But yeah, when I was approached by the EJC and they asked me if I could give a talk about juggling, science, and the brain, my thoughts were like, a talk? Like me? Why? What? And I think that's questions that you are thinking yourself right now, so I thought we start by answering these. Maybe the first question is like, me? My name is Georg, I live in Leipzig in Germany, and I juggle since, I was trained as a physicist in Marburg, and I'm juggling for about 10 years, mostly poi. And I'm also active in Team Firespace, who does the lovely Firespace right outside the tent, and Phoenix Fire Convention in Germany, which you might have heard of. And at the moment, I'm doing my PhD at the Chemnitz Technical University in the program of sensors and cognitive psychology. And there I want to investigate sensomotoric coupling using a simplified juggling task in virtual reality. And you're probably thinking, yay, juggling science with virtual reality and what? And yeah, so in the next 30 minutes or so, I want to give you a non-exhaustive overview about the research that I found doing literature research for my PhD project. And yes, I'll also explain what psychophysics is supposed to be. So, next question, why juggling, right? Why is that interesting for scientists? And so there's actually various fields that take interest in juggling itself. So firstly, it has some intrinsic mathematical structure, so it's interesting for mathematicians. It also is a dynamic movement, so physicists and people interested in dynamic systems and complex systems are interested in juggling as well. The task itself is quite challenging to execute, so brain researchers and experimental psychologists are also interested in the task. And apparently juggling has some health benefits, so you can also find some science in like health and movement sports scientists that is investigating juggling. And I thought it would be a nice idea to divide my talk in like 3 blocks. The first would be science about juggling itself. The second would be science that's using juggling to investigate other things, and lastly, science that's about the effects of juggling. Yeah? And as previously said, there will be a discussion in the end, I hope, and if I'm too quick or if you didn't get anything, please don't hesitate to just make yourself noticeable and ask me to rewind a bit. Yeah? So, why am I doing brain research? I was trained as a physicist, and maybe you've heard that the human brain is the most complex structure we know in the universe, and it can do some really amazing feats. Like if we, for example, look at balancing, that has been investigated by letting people balance a stick on their fingertips, but the process is actually similar to how our brain balances ourselves on our feet. Yeah? And you can describe that with a so-called delayed differential equation. It won't get more serious than that, don't worry. But the important part is that this is not only dependent on the time t, but also the state at time t is dependent on the state, like on time tau before t, right? So the tau is the delay. And in general, these differential equations don't have a closed solution. That means we can't just write down a formula that gives us all the possible solution for this. But the brain doesn't care. Yeah? It's just reacting fast enough so it can still control this process without caring about the fact that there's no closed solution. And just to illustrate how that works, balance is achieved with an open feedback loop that's continuously executed. We have information from our senses going towards our brain, like from our vestibular system that tells us where it's downward, and our proprioception that tells us where our limbs are in space. And from this state, the brain computes a motor command to regain balance, so to say, and it sends this motor commands to the limbs, which change their position, and thus we get new input and new information, and the brain just makes the next motor command, right? And this is executed again and again, and it happens fast enough so that we are always correcting a bit and we never fall over. You know? And I mean, something like standing still seems pretty static. If you look at me, I'm not moving that much in space. But if we take a little bit of a closer look, which is usually done by putting people on force plates, where we measure the center of pressure, which is, if you think of your center of mass, and you project that downwards onto the floor plane, that's your center of pressure. And there were some experiments that asked people to just stand with their eyes closed, and they did recordings of the center of pressure, and what seemed kind of stable, if you look closely enough, you see quite chaotic movement. Yeah? So you could say that there is two different scales to look at it. In the one scale, if you're far away, it looks static, but if you look close enough, it's very dynamic and chaotic. So a sentence that I read in this paper I found really beautiful was to say that balance rests on micro-chaos. And I don't know who of you went to Mies's workshop on balancing the other day, but he said very similar things, yeah? You keep the two sticks you're balancing in a constant distance, and what's happening in your hands is chaotic. So yeah, the brain can do really amazing things, that's why I'm interested in it. And to get more towards the juggling things, the traditional way is choosing a historical background. And we know that at least juggling balls is done since a few thousand years. So there is some depictions in Egyptian murals from, I think, almost 4,000 years ago that shows people juggling balls. But it's still continuously evolving and changing, while the actual research about juggling is still quite young. Yeah? So as far as I know, the first paper that was written in this regard is actually by Claude Shannon, which some of you may know as kind of the father of information technique. He won a Nobel Prize for introducing the concept of entropy for informatics. And he was also known for riding a unicycle across the institute while juggling balls. And in the 90s, there was a book published called Collected Papers. And there you find a paper that's from circa 1980s, where he describes some basic parameters of juggling and even suggests like a basic notation for patterns. And I believe there's also some notes of him where he sketched a juggling robot. So he was very much into looking into that from a scientific perspective. And then what some of the people who are maybe more into math also may know that Ron Graham, who some people may know from Graham's number or from the Graham-Erdős conjecture, he was also an avid juggler. And together with his wife, Fan Chang, he published several papers about the combinatorics of periodical juggling patterns with a fixed number of objects. And that has also been expanded to non-periodic patterns and more particles. And there's also some connections to more abstract math, like that goes towards combinatorics and while groups, but that's way beyond my scope. I'm no mathematician. Maybe there's somebody in the audience who can tell us more about that later. But there's one math paper that I found really nice that I wanted to show you. And it's Harry Varpanen's idea of state diagrams, or kind of state flow, if you want so. So that's Harry. And he had the idea of describing juggling as a Markov chain of states. So a Markov chain is a series of events where the next event depends on, where the next states depends on the state before, or even multiple states before. So what you see here is the state cycle diagram for the pattern 451. And the way this works is that, you don't see my pointer? The way this works is that in every time steps, all the balls move one position further downwards, and the lowest position is thrown again. Yeah? So we start in this position here, and the bottommost ball is thrown to position number 4, and all the other balls move one position downwards, and that's how we get to this state. Yeah? The next ball is thrown to position number 5, while all other balls again move one position downwards, and then we arrive at this state, and there we have no ball at the lowest position, which means the next throw is going to be 0. Yeah? And then we're back to the start. So that is a 3-state Markov chain that's periodically repeating. But in his paper, Harry actually showed the state graph for 3-particle juggling with maximum throw 5. So here you can see all the side swaps with 3 objects with maximum 5. And the pattern I just shown you here is highlighted in red. So if you want to find a side swap, just choose any state, find a circular path, you have your pattern. That's really amazing, isn't it? And if you try to include more throw heights, the system gets more complicated and interconnected. And I guess that's why he chose to just depict up to maximum 5. But what I found especially pleasing is that Harry doesn't only look at classical toss juggling, but he also suggested a notation that's based on this state idea for spin juggling, namely poi. And he chose to model a poi juggler as a connection between the shoulders, and the poi basically as extended arms. So what you can see here is the state diagram representation of somebody spinning split time same direction. Yeah, you have one poi pointing up, one poi pointing down, and the next state they interchange. The other poi points up, the other poi points down. And the blue arrows mean that no arm or poi actually crosses the body side. Yeah? And that's just a tiny piece of the same of the full state diagram. It actually looks way more confusing like this. Here, red arrows indicate that an arm or a poi is crossing over to the other body side. And like some of you may be familiar with the 3-beat weave, that's like similar to a Mills Mass hand path. And if you want to find the 3-beat weave here, I took some time yesterday evening to figure it out, but it is like a figure of 8 movement. The slides are available if you just email me if you want to figure it out. You can do it, or you check Harry Varpanen 2014. And on a side note, that's a totally valid statement to say that scientists agree that poi spinning is juggling. Yeah? All right. Going forward from the mathematical perspective on juggling more towards the executive perspective, lots of fundamental work was done by Peter Beek, who is a professor for movement science at Amsterdam, I believe, and he published a lot about juggling and the spatiotemporal parameters. So he did high-speed camera recordings of people doing 4-ball fountain synchronous and asynchronous patterns, even with some restrictions like juggling to a beat or juggling to a certain height. And here you see some of the results. So what's depicted here is several rounds of 4-ball asynchronous fountain, I guess. The filled black dots here depict the height to which the people should juggle. And the circles are the average positions of the catching, throwing, and turning point events. And the size of the circle represents the variance in space. Yeah? So the smaller the circle, the more closer together in space these events happen. So what you can see, So what you can see here is that the throws are quite precise. Where's my pointer? Here. As well as the turning points. I would maybe assume that this is a left-handed person, since the turning points here are a little bit less distributed in space than the ones on the other side, while the catches vary a lot. And I mean, most people of you who do several objects, I guess you can recognize that. Yeah? And also, Peter Beek was the one who discovered that expert jugglers don't really keep their gaze fixed at the high point of a pattern, but they usually employ more like a gaze-through strategy to keep the gaze fixed at the center of the pattern, and you follow several objects in your periphery. Also, you did some work on error correction during juggling, which is very fundamental for the psychophysics of juggling and my own work. And I didn't find the exact quotation, but I think it was in one of his papers that I found the information that the average human reaction speed is like 200 milliseconds. And while juggling 5 objects, we're throwing and catching on average like every 120 milliseconds. Yeah? So almost double as fast as the reaction time, which also has some implications, namely that we don't really react to the patterns, but we more like tune into the rhythm. Yeah? And that's the bridge to my own work. But before we go into that, as I promised before, I'll explain what psychophysics actually is supposed to be. So, what's psychophysics? The central question is, can we model and quantify the experience of perception inside the brain somehow? And the answer is yes. If we just treat the brain like a black box, that's possible. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, you have a black box that contains something. You have some input in the sense of a brain that's like the perception from our senses, and you have some output that comes out of the box. Yeah, if you keep that metaphor, then the input would be the perception from our senses, and the output would be our behavior. That's like a very simple, straightforward model. And the question is like, how can we find out what's inside the box? Yeah? And the idea is that we carefully control the input. That's what we call a stimulus in perception research, and we look at how the behavior change that comes out of the box. Yeah? And so we have several experimental conditions, and we try to keep everything as constant as possible, except for the one thing that we want to investigate. And then we compare the behavior between those experimental conditions, and that's how we gain insights in some of the inner workings inside our head. Like a simple example would be a hearing test. You control like the pitch and the volume of the tone, that's the stimulus, and the behavior you're looking for is the people who raise their hand when they hear the sound. And that way you can actually measure the threshold of perception, right? So you can measure at which pitches and volumes people detect sounds. And I think that's really amazing. You kind of look inside the brain without opening the skull, which I find really nice, to be honest. And but it actually is a little bit more complicated because perception and action actually directly influence each other. Yeah? And like I have a little experiment for you that we can do right now if you want to. Who of you has a like reflecting surface with them, a mirror or a smartphone? You can hold the smartphone. If you use your smartphone, don't just use the reflection, right, with the screen turned off, and hold it so that you can see your own eyes. Yeah? And then look backwards from one eye to the other, back and forth, in the reflection. Yeah? And most of you should not see their eyes moving. You see yourself looking at one eye, and then you see yourself looking at the other eye, but you don't really see how your eyes move from left to right, right? And now repeat the same using your front camera. So if you do the same thing, But now looking on your eyes on the video from your front camera, you will actually see your eyes moving to the other side. And the effect you're seeing there, that's called saccadic suppression. A saccade, this is one of these jerky, from French, saccader, jerk, motions that we do with our eyes. And while we perform these saccades, our brain actually suppresses contrast sensitivity. And it's thought that this mechanism is one of the reasons why we don't get dizzy all the time, because as primates, our eyes move actually more than our hearts beat. And this contrast suppression helps us, helps the brain to create this like head-stable 3D color movie that we're all experiencing. And the reason why you're seeing this on your smartphone camera but not in the reflection is that there's a tiny bit of delay where the information travels from the camera sensor to the screen of the phone, and this delay is enough so that the movement is actually outside of the time interval where your brain suppresses the sensitivity. And yeah, that's another way of looking into the brain. If we can robustly induce errors in the output, right? We put some error pattern into the input and we find it in the output, then we can also learn something about the inner workings of the black box. Yeah, but lots of these things are only really visible in experimentally controlled conditions, because in natural environments, our brain has so many references that we don't notice these kinds of things. Yeah? So, we now know what psychophysics is and like the way I'm working, but what am I actually doing? So I'm interested in synchronization, the way how we tune into stimuli that are presented from the outside, like dancing to a beat, and like how these things were usually investigated, like tapping to a metronome. And that's a really interesting skill because it's quite unique in the animal kingdom. There's only a few animals besides humans who are capable of doing this. Few can learn it, but as far as I know, there is no animals that show this very spontaneously. It was brought to my note that apparently some birds show some synchronization behavior in their mating rituals, but I'm neither a biologist and I haven't found the right paper. I'm not really sure if that's synchronization in the way I'm looking at it, but it exists, so I didn't want to make the statement that it's an exclusively human feature. You still have to be precise, you know. So this synchronization is usually investigated if you give people an external rhythm to synchronize to, and then you manipulate the rhythm. For example, here you can see such a manipulated rhythm. The dots indicate like clicks of the metronome, and then here we have an interval that is too long, and then we continue with the same rhythm. So if we look at the difference between each clicks, yeah, we have a constant difference between each click, then there's one interval which is too long, and then we go back to the old tempo. That's what we call a phase shift. And if we look at the behavioral answer, people were tapping to the beat of this and then inducing this error, like made them make a mistake. And what we see is that within a few taps, we subconsciously and automatically correct this beat and we are back in phase again. That's like the groundwork I was building up from. Nowadays, movement science has moved from this very one-dimensional, discrete movement, you only move your arm, to like bouncing your body to a beat, or even free dance, which is complex, higher dimensional movement. And also is a step towards more naturalistic environments, right? If you just put people in a dark chamber and let them repeat the same eye movement thousands of times again, we may learn something, but that's not really natural behavior. And yeah, but these manipulations are really hard to implement with real juggling. So yeah, that was one of the questions I was dealing with, like how can I make this more controllable? And the answer is virtual reality. Yeah, there I can, for example, freeze or delay balls. And the other thing was, it's still really hard. Like if maybe some of you tried juggling in Half-Life Alyx or saw the video. If you lack the haptic feedback, it's super hard to juggle in there. But can I make it even more easier? Can I make it more controllable? And thankfully, I was introduced to the functional juggling concept and the juggle board. So I used that to make it more accessible. And the nice thing about doing it in virtual reality is that we can use a virtual reality headset and controllers to simultaneously present the stimulus and record the movement and eye tracking data. Also, it really fits smoothly into one suit case, so I was able to bring it here. And that's a picture from my real-world setup. So I made my uni by a juggle board. I'm wearing some mobile eye tracking glasses, and on the side there here, you can see some motion tracking markers on there that are used to check the orientation of the head, so we can use math to see where people actually looked in space. And I also put some motion sensors under the board to follow the movement of the balls. So that's how it looked like prototyping. I just put the sensors below, and then when I found the right configuration, I made a nice backplate so my participants can't see the messy cables hiding behind it. And what I basically do is, while these balls are rolling up and down that board, they are occluding the markers, so that gives me space-time points where I can interpolate the movement of the ball. Actually, it's a little bit more complicated because I had to model it with the differential equation, but if you're really interested in that, come talk to me after the talk. This is some data I get from there. So what you can see is the estimated position of the board. On the left side, you can see like one track. And marked in red are the positions where the ball occluded the marker while rolling up and down. And from the markers attached to the hands, I could infer the moments where they grabbed or caught a ball. And so I got like a continuous trajectory. But yeah, and again here, that's the area where the markers were occluded. So if a ball turned back before going out of the upper occlusion area again, I would have like 6 points to fit the curve. If it would leave that, there's even 2 more points, right? And modeling that, there are some caveats into that, but let's not dive too deep in there. Just as an illustration, I want to show you how some of my results look. It's not about what's in there. I want to give an example of how we actually look into these things. So what I was comparing was the average time between the turning point of a ball, which is denoted in violet here, and I call it delta t ball. And then I compared that between the performance of the participants with a real-world board and with the virtual reality board. And it looks something like that. So I had one ball on the ipsilateral or native side, one ball on the contralateral or non-native side, and there was also a condition where people could have 2 balls. And in red, you see data from the real-world setup, and in blue, you see data from the virtual reality setup. There's like some things you can learn from that, but the important thing is there is a difference. You see that the red and the blue dots are not on the same line, but they kind of share the same quality, right? So the error bars on the right in the 2-ball condition, they are bigger than the error bars in the 1-ball condition. And that's true for both the real and the virtual setup. And I also looked at the variance, like how much variance is there in between these periods, and we found a similar pattern. The analysis we did with that is called an ANOVA, analysis of variance, and the gist of it is that, yes, there are some differences between the real world behavior and the virtual world behavior, but qualitatively, the pattern is similar enough that it's valid to do experiments in virtual reality only. Yeah? And yeah, that's what I've been doing here. As I said, there are some quantitative differences, but also some interactions with the body sides. I'm not too sure if I'm actually maybe measuring some of the effects of the VR controllers that I'm using. And I'm also collecting gaze data to see how the gaze is coupling with the movement, and like, are people more focused on following their hands, or they're focused on following their balls, and what's the difference between expert jugglers and non-jugglers? So that's what I'm recording here. I'm recording from a group which can do at least 5 objects, and I will do the same experiment back in Chemnitz with people who don't juggle at all to see what difference it makes in this special task to be able to juggle at least 5 objects. What I also recorded, as I said, is gaze data, so I was looking where people direct the gaze. This looks something like that. So the green dot is where the person was looking in that frame, and the red line is the trace over a few seconds. And you can see there's quite a lot of movement. And we can also do similar things in virtual reality. Actually, I have some real data with me that I can show you. So this is Unity, and where I do my experiments. Let me find my mouse pointer. And I want to direct your attention on this part here, which is like the bird's view on my experiment. And I'll just actually load in some raw data that I collected. And what you will see is the movement of the balls, how they were moved by my participant. You can also see like a dot that's moving over the board. That's the gaze position at the moment. What you don't see is the hands, because I haven't put in the models of the hands yet, so it is a little eerie. But let's just take a look. And it's a little bit slower than it was during the experiment, because the frame height is a little bit different. And that was a person that was asked to roll a ball in a constant rhythm on one track. And you can see that the gaze is following more or less the track here. And actually, I can also show you some data from the condition where we had, where we had both balls. So yeah, now you see two balls. They were asked to move them asynchronously in, again, a continuous rhythm. And here you can see that people are actually shifting their attention from the left to the right side. Because like where we direct our gaze is a proxy for our visual attention, at least. And these are the things I'm interested in, and what I will be comparing is like the gaze patterns between both of these conditions, both in the real and in the virtual world. But yeah, I haven't finished my analysis code yet, so that's what I can show you for now. The more quantitative analysis will follow in the next weeks and months. But yeah, the takeaway message is, yes, we can model juggling in virtual reality, and we can do experiments there. And like I already said, that's what I'm recording here. And I'm really thankful for all the support I got from the EJC, and I'm really thankful that I'm allowed to do these things. Going towards the third block, I want to ask an intermediate question, like why am I interested in synchronization? And yeah, there's several reasons. So there is science that shows us that synchronized movement actually is a marker for improved social connections. I think this paper investigated the body movements of psychiatrists and clients and saw that with the better relationships between therapist and client, we also saw more synchronized movement. What is also really amazing is that if you look at social interaction and you do hyperscanning, which is recording the electrical field on your scalp with an EEG, but from two people at the same time, we can see that when we are interacting and communicating, even the firing rates of the neurons inside our brain actually synchronize. And I think that's pretty cool. And careful, this is pure speculation on my side. I also was introduced to trauma therapy called REMD, Rapid Eye Movement Desensitization, which is really cutting-edge science. As far as I know, we know that this has an effect, but the mechanism is not yet clear, although it's already taught in psych school, as far as I know. And while speaking with some friends who also dabble in perception and psychology, I started asking myself, is maybe this is working because it's not only about a rhythmic movement, but also there's lateralization involved, like information is flowing from the one hemisphere of the brain to the other side. Information is flowing between both sides of the body. So, but as I said, this is really speculative. This is something that I'm personally interested in. I would really love to do more research about this. Hopefully, if I manage to finish my PhD and continue to secure some funding. Let's see about that. But there is some facts that we can prove, hard facts, like motor training, training movements induces long-term changes in the brain structure, which we can prove with doing MRI scans. I mean, also that's not too surprising. I mean, you learn things and neural connections form in your brain. But the nice thing is that these are actually long-term and you can still find them like months after a training intervention. And that brings me to like the last highlight, which is the PhD thesis of Kate Riegler van West from Australia, I guess. I think she's from Australia, not from New Zealand. Where is she? Does anyone know? Okay. But she did her dissertation on the beneficial effects on poi spinning in the elderly. And that was also like a really nice, straightforward design. So she had some group of people who were at least 60 years old. And they had an assessment, like a test battery of various things like cognitive ability, range of motion, general fitness. And they assessed that like 4 weeks before and directly before an intervention, which was either Tai Chi or poi spinning. Then they assessed that again immediately after the intervention and again 4 weeks later. And what they found is that poi seems to be as equally as effective as Tai Chi in improving certain factors as like memory, range of motion, and blood pressure. And maybe you see how carefully I phrased that. That's always the thing about science. We look at very specific details, and from these very specific details, we try to collect a very broad picture. And that's one of the reasons why when you come with a question to a scientist, like, is this so-and-so? One of the most common answers is like either yes, but actually no, or kinda, or that's so simplified it gets kinda wrong, right? This is the reason why these conversations go like that. And I think having communication thingies like these, where you can actually give back some of the knowledge that is created using mostly tax money is a really nice thing, and we should make more science openly available like that. So if there's some scientists around here, do more open science, publish without any restrictions. That's cool. And coming to the end of the talk, aside from like general health research, I also found one study that also used functional juggling, but to investigate into the impaired health of people. And to end the talk, I want to briefly introduce the concept to you. Like I use it to make juggling more accessible and controllable in an experimental setting, but the whole concept is thought of to make circus and juggling more accessible in general. It's a project of Craig Quatt from Canada, I believe. You can find more info on his homepage. And the underlying question was basically, what is juggling? And if you're interested in that, I believe tomorrow from 15 in the Yellow Hall, there's Gerrit Wilders there who does some demonstrations on functional juggling. Like, is he here as well? Hi, there's Gerrit. We have been in email contact, but we haven't seen each other's faces yet. It's really nice of you to join. If you want to hear more about functional juggling, check out the Yellow Gym tomorrow. And yeah, like I said, there also is some quite recent research about scientists from Italy who looked into the health of impaired adults. And what I like about this is that it kind of takes a step towards more of a systematic and physical way of looking at juggling. So Craig's supposed definition of juggling looks like that, and to dissect that a bit, that juggling is a process that you constantly need to monitor, a little bit like balance, for example. The actions and the states repeat more or less periodically, and it's not really about maximizing your effort, but optimizing it, like putting the right amount of action into the system. And this is a more inclusive definition of juggling, which makes it really clear that, like, as it is in my book, also balance juggling and spin juggling very much is juggling. And I also, like, excuse me if it's a bit cheesy, but I want to advocate for more interconnection here. Like, prop speciesism is really a bad idea. It's nice to make some jokes, but in the end, we're all jugglers, and I really like how people just interact together in the gyms. But it also has some caveats, which are mostly about communication. So if you just applied this very rigidly, this definition could also apply to playing music. And to me, it sounds very much like a synchronization perspective. But yeah, I guess that's something for an ongoing discussion in the next years. I'm really excited to see where this is going. These are my references. And yeah, we've reached the end of the talk. I really want to thank the EJT core team, which you can see here. Also, special thanks to Jan Polen, who has been super kind in supporting me with my experiment. Also, Jopi, who has been in contact with me before the EJC, and to Remke and Mia for the nice support for the talk. Also, thanks to our team back in Chemnitz, because these things are usually group efforts. I want to highlight my supervisor, Wolfgang Einhäuser, who made this all possible and sent me to EJC. Also, where is he? Sascha Feder, who helped me with the juggle board, Karl Müller and Karl Kopiske, who helped me with the setup of the original motion tracking, and Jochen Miksch, who taught me how to use basic C# to tell Unity what I wanted to do. Also, heartfelt thank yous to my anonymous participants who decided to sacrifice 90 minutes of the EJC to help me collect some data to analyze and cry over. Also, thanks to Craig Quad for inventing the juggle board and Peter Hundorf for introducing the concept to me. And I hope, yeah, you learned a little bit about juggling, science, and the human brain. Thank you so much for coming and listening, and thank you for your questions.